Hi, I'm David Vanderpool, and I'm a longtime missionary in Haiti, live in Tamazo, Haiti, just a little bit east of Port-au-Prince. We've been down there about 10 years total. And would like to talk to you about best practices in short-term missions from a long-term missionary standpoint. And so it's a little bit of a different take on the usual. So this is our base in Haiti. We have a surgical hospital that we've built, a school, have a large maternal health program, as well as a child nutrition program, and a demonstration farm. So we sort of have a complete holistic type approach to long-term missions. So one day I woke up. It's about 2006, I think it was in December, and I was in a bright red one-man tent. We had driven in the night before about midnight, and so we hadn't really seen the surroundings, and so I was really curious where we were and what it looked like. So I unzipped the door and stuck my head out, and the bright red Mozambican clay extended as far as I could see. We were in northern Mozambique. I was on a short-term mission to provide medical care to the people of this area. So I wanted to go exploring a little bit. It was about dawn, and so I decided to walk through the village. I was walking through the village, and nature called, right? And so I found a suitable, strategically placed tree, walked across a field, and as I got about midway through the field, the villagers were yelling at me. Unfortunately, they were yelling at me in Makua, which I just really didn't speak. And so I proceeded along, and one of the long-term missionaries yelled at me and said, "You're in a minefield. You need to retrace your steps very carefully." Fortunately, the Mozambican dirt is fairly loose and soft, so I could see my boot prints. I did sort of forget my original objective at that point. That became a little less important. But I walked back through very carefully, putting my feet back into the boot prints that I could see. Obviously, I made it out, so I wouldn't be here if I didn't. But I was in a minefield. You know, there are minefields everywhere. There are a lot of minefields in Mozambique, less than used to be. But there's a lot of minefields. There's a lot of minefields in short-term missions. And this long-term missionary guided me out of this particular minefield that I'd gotten myself in really pretty quickly. I'd only been in Mozambique about 2 days. I'd already gotten into a minefield. So today, what I want to do is sort of walk us through the minefield that's short-term missions. And from the perspective of somebody who lives every day in Haiti, ministering to the people of Haiti, a little bit different perspective. Now, so let me see a show of hands. How many people have read When Helping Hurts? Anybody know that book? Okay, it's a little bit old now. I was sort of wondering if maybe it had gone out. So it was early 2000s, I think. I think that's about right. So When Helping Hurts, it came out talking about damages that short-term missions did. And so it's a good book. So love for you guys to read that. But we're going to talk about how we can develop best practices models for short-term missions. So the number one thing that I think is important in developing the best practices models for short-term missions is the short-term missionary, right? So we're going to start talking about the short-term missionary. So that's going to be you guys, right? So it's extremely important that the short-term missionary prepares themselves for what's coming, right? It's hard to do because you don't really know what's coming. If you're going to a low-tier country like I live in, you may not have electricity. Haiti has very little electricity. You may not have running water. Almost certainly won't have hot water, right? You may be using a latrine, right? You're going to see things that will really break your heart every day that you're there. And you've got to prepare yourself. So when we're preparing ourselves, I think a series of questions is really important. First question that I would want everybody to answer is, why are you going? Why go on a short-term mission? You've got 2 weeks of vacation every year, and you're going to take half of that and go to some place most people think, is in Africa. Most people think Haiti's in Africa, right? So it's not, by the way. You're going to go someplace, and you're going to spend your time, and it's going to be hot, and it's going to be miserable, and mosquitoes are going to bite you, and you're going to have bugs in your mosquito netting, and that's going to be your vacation, right? So why are you going? What is the purpose of your visit? The second question it helps sort of the first question. The second question is, who are you serving? And this gets a little bit personal, right? So you don't have to answer this out loud. Who are you serving? Are you serving yourself, or are you serving the Lord Jesus, right? Because we have a choice. Now, a lot of people think they're serving the Lord when actually it's just sort of making them feel better about themselves. And we see that a lot. So answering the question, who are you serving? Are you God-centric, or are you you-centric, right? Because that makes a big difference in answering that first question on why you're going. What are your qualifications? Do you have a skill set that's going to be really useful in this particular environment? Perhaps you're a nurse. Perhaps you're a dentist. Perhaps you're a doctor. Perhaps you're a business person. You may have skill sets that are going to be very helpful in these particular areas. The next one's a biggie. It's also sort of a tough one. Have you been called to go? Has the Lord spoken to you and said, I want you to go? Now, I think everybody is called to missions. If you're a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, I think the Great Commission, pertains to all of us. But may not be long-term missions, right? Only you really have to be called for a long-term mission. But that mission may be your next-door neighbor, right? That mission may be the homeless who are in your town. That mission may be feeding people who are hungry. It may be tutoring inner-city kids who just have a hard time with education. That may be the mission that you're called to. So making sure you're called is absolutely an imperative. What are your goals? What do you want to achieve? You're going to be gone a week, say, maybe it's 2 weeks. What is your goal? Is your goal to be able to check the box so that you go back home and you go, I went to Haiti. Where'd you go? Well, I went to the Bahamas, right? I was laying on the beach. What's your goal? Is your goal to further the kingdom? Because that's a good one. I mean, that's a big one. Is your goal to help people who are afflicted, who are oppressed? Maybe it's somebody who's in slavery. Child slavery is a big problem throughout the world. Maybe it's one of those. If that's your goal, that's awesome. But finding out what you want to achieve while you're there, it's very important. I have dear friends who unabashedly say they go because they're interested in mission tourism, right? And I always sort of tease them about it. So really, I mean, come on. That's okay. If they want to go on a mission tour, that's great. But that's one of their goals. And they sort of say it out loud, and I guess that makes it okay. It's not what we do, but that's all right. Maybe for somebody. So preparing yourself spiritually is very, very important. Listening to the Lord and finding out if He is calling you to this particular place at this particular time. Because there are times in your life that are appropriate for missions, and then there are times that just really aren't. If you've got little kids, leaving your little kids and waltzing off to Haiti, that may not be the right time. Those little kids really may need you. Maybe you've got a job that's new and you really just can't take time off. It may not be an appropriate time in your life to go. When you get old like me, you can go. I mean, nobody misses you, so you might as well go, right? But seeking the Lord through prayer, fasting, and also seeking wise counsel, going to your friends, going to your family, going to people who know you, who really know your heart, and talking to them about going on this mission trip. They can help you. They will see things that you might not want to admit, but after they tell you about them, you probably shake your head and say, yeah, that's probably right. So first order of business is to prepare yourself spiritually. But there's more to it than that. A lot of times, short-term mission trips, especially in low-tier areas, in very struggling areas, are an emotional roller coaster. In fact, when we bring teams down, we spend about an hour and a half each night sort of debriefing everybody because we want people to talk through things. It's not good to hold things in. We want them to talk through things and sort of process what they've seen because they've seen things that they've never seen before. And so an emotional stability is very important. Psychologically, you know how you respond to traumatic situations. You're probably going to be in traumatic situations in some of these areas. If you don't respond very well to those situations, it may not be the best place to go. There may be another place that would be good for you that might be less traumatic. But you'll know that, and the people around you will know that. One of the things our ministry does is it's hot where we live. I mean, it's really hot. It's like Houston hot, except there's no air conditioning, right? And it never gets as cool as Houston does in the wintertime. So being in good shape is very, very important. And so if we have somebody, they've had a heart attack recently, they don't need to come. They just don't need to come. If they have brittle diabetes, you know what? They're probably going to have a hard time coming down. If they have certain diseases, maybe they have leukemia, that's probably not a good person to come to our environment. If they have a lot of allergies, it's probably not a good place for people to come. So making sure that you're physically fit and healthy to go on a short-term mission is very important as well. You know, one of the things that I think is a great test, and this is when people come to us and they want to come down and be a long-term missionary with us, I ask this question: what are you doing at home to serve the people in need? So you live in Dallas, you live in Houston, you live in Kansas City, wherever you live, are you serving effectively there? Because if you're not, you don't need to come to Haiti, right? You can save the plane ticket and start doing something at home. If you're not serving the poor, not serving people who are oppressed in your everyday, day-to-day life, it's not going to work to come to a foreign country. It's going to be worse. One of the biggest weapons that you can wield, do you know what it is? You know what the biggest weapon you can wield in a mission scenario? It's humility. That's a massive weapon. It is. It's amazing, right? You don't think of it that way. You think of it as sort of a weakness sometimes. But humility is absolutely vital to success. And so when we're talking about best practices, practicing humility. You know, we can build muscles by working out, right? At least I used to be able to. I'm sort of getting over that stuff. But you can do the same thing with humility. You can do the same thing with love. Practicing love for people, right? Practicing humility. Somebody insults you, and instead of popping right back at them, you practice some of that humility, right? You get that muscle really strong, and you're unstoppable when you get into situations like that. So practicing humility and love at home is vital. Now, one of the things I think is just absolutely vital for short-term missions, for the success of short-term missions, is that they are working together with a long-term mission. I don't think short-term missions will be very likely to be successful without a long-term missionary. I would have gotten blown up, right? If I hadn't had a long-term missionary, I would have just sort of waltzed through that minefield and not even know what hit me, right? That's what happens. There are so many cultural differences between the people that we serve in Haiti and in Africa where we work We're about to start serving in the Middle East, in the West Bank. Massive cultural differences, right? And so the best way to learn those cultural differences is to have long-term missionaries guide you through the minefield, right? Because they know where the landmines are. So working with a long-term mission, I think, is absolutely an imperative. Now, working with that long-term mission means furthering the purposes of that mission, not just coming down and doing your own thing. I remember one time we had a girl come down. She just graduated from college, and boy, she was going to come down and do some new mission stuff. Well, that's great, except she had no experience, right? And experience is a whole lot better than a degree when you're in the mission field. So, we sort of had a way that we had worked on and sort of perfected over the decade and knew how the Haitians would respond, right? Because they respond differently than Americans do. And that wasn't good enough for her. And she didn't make it, which is a shame, because she could have been somebody who could have really done well had she practiced humility and learning. Working with a long-term mission really improves follow-up. And almost anything you're going to do, whether it's medical, whether it's working with children in a school, whatever it is that you're going to do, you're going to need to have follow-up. And so the long-term mission serves as the follow-up. When you leave, you're gone after a week or 2 weeks, somebody's got to be there to then keep the scenario going. So if you're there to spread the gospel, somebody's got to be there to disciple the people, right? And so the long-term mission is vital. Cultural snafus. My goodness, have I committed a lifetime of cultural snafus. It's almost like I've hit every single one. We were counting up the years. I've done short-term missions since 1974, right? I mean, that's like a long time ago. I mean, that's a previous millennium, right? And so we have made a lot of mistakes. I wish we'd written them down, because now we're getting so old we can't remember them, so we don't want to repeat them. But the cultural snafus, sometimes you sort of get by with it, sometimes you don't get by with it so much. But having somebody there long term will really help you. It's really interesting when you look in the Bible, when you try to answer this question, what are the best practices scenarios for short-term missions? The Bible doesn't have a lot on this stuff. And so it's sort of interesting. One of the passages that does talk about it is in Philippians 2. And it's talking about Epaphroditus, right? And Paul, who was in prison, sent Epaphroditus to Philippi to minister to the folks, right? He was sort of a short-term mission. So Epaphroditus' role was to minister to the long-term missionaries, right? That's really about the only scenario I can find in the New Testament that really talks about best practices. I can almost guarantee 100% of the time, if you're going to see a long-term missionary, they need ministering to. I can almost flat out guarantee it. They're away from home. They're away from their family. They don't get Netflix. I mean, how do you exist, right? They live in a very harsh environment. Perhaps it's not a secure environment, and so they are maybe sort of on the knife edge. They may be really struggling, and they need people to minister to them. That's one of the best things that you can do. One of the scriptures that I love is Paul, is asking for his coat, right? He's in Rome, he's in prison, it's getting cold, and he says, please come before winter, right, and bring my coat. And that was a ministry that Paul needed. It's interesting, there is a group of, I think, women who have an organization that's called Come Before Winter. And they go, and their primary ministry is to long-term missionaries. And they come in and they just focus on the long-term missionary. I can't think of a better thing that you could possibly do than doing just that, because the long-term missionaries, almost by definition, are going to be struggling. So you say, okay, I need to work with a long-term mission. So how do I pick one out? What is it that I look for that a long-term mission would show me that a long-term mission is good? So I've written down a few things, and we can go through these pretty quickly. But in my opinion, the long-term mission really needs to have good governmental relationships. They need to be working with the local government. This is something that's often overlooked, but it's very, very important that we're entering a foreign country, and that country has a government. It may not be a great government, but it's a government, and it's their government, right? And we are guests in that country. I've been in Haiti 10 years, and I'm still a guest in the country, right? I mean, I still have to get my visa renewed every year. And so being respectful of the government and the rules and the laws that they have may be completely different than the laws here in the United States. Haiti's laws are based on an entirely different system than the United States. And so just when you think you got them down, they're not. You don't have them. It's a very strange thing. So being respectful of the government and having good government relations, I think, is very important. Likewise, the long-term mission has to have good relationships with the local population. That's who they're there serving. If they don't have those good relationships, something's amiss, right? And so when you're looking for best practices, that's going to be a very important thing. Obviously, you need to make sure that they're going to have clean water for you. They're going to have, good food for you, and it's going to be a secure situation. Obviously, based on Christian principles. It has to be based on Christian principles. So there is another subset that I'd like to ask. Raise your hand if you've heard of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. Anybody ever heard of those? Got one. Okay, so the United Nations came up with the Millennium Development Goals. They finished in 2015. They now have the Sustainable Development Goals. I'd very much encourage you guys to Google those and look those up, because these are the goals that the United Nations feels are the most important things to develop in low-tier countries. So they do not apply to the United States or Western Europe. They're talking about low-tier countries. And so we can sort of look through these. But I think that these are key for long-term missionaries to be working in these in some fashion, because this is what improves the lives of the local population. Jesus said in John 10:10, I came to give life and give life abundantly. That's right. And I love that scripture. That's actually, for our organization, it's our scripture for this year. That Jesus came to give life and give life abundantly. And these millennial development goals are great for giving life to people in a low-tier country. Eradicating poverty and hunger, education, gender equality, improve child mortality and maternal health, combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, ensure environmental sustainability, things like this that are very, very key. So a couple of things that, as we drill down and become more specific, how many people here go on medical missions? This is a medical missions conference, so I guess most everybody goes on medical missions, right? So a couple of things that are very important, again, that are often overlooked in a healthcare environment. So one thing, if you're a doctor or a nurse, do you have a medical license for that country? That's a big deal. If somebody from Haiti, a Haitian, came to the United States and hung out a shingle saying that he's a doctor in the United States, that wouldn't go very well, right? I mean, they would probably put him in jail for that. Likewise, these countries have rules. They'll have ministers of health, and they have ways that Americans can come and work in their country. They really want to know where you are. So, and if you're qualified, they don't want people coming in who are unqualified. And then they may even make recommendations for a place for you to work, because they know where the deficiencies are in their country. And so working with the Ministry of Health is, I think, very vital. Registering with the Ministry of Health. Import licensing for bringing in medicines. A lot of people just stuff them in their bag and hope they don't get caught, right? Well, that's not really a good plan, and it's disrespectful to the local governments, because they have a reason. They have laws. You couldn't do that in the United States, right? If you brought in, I think there's an entire governmental organization that tries to keep drugs out of the United States. So, and it's the same in some of these countries. Driver's license. Do you have a driver's license, an international driver's license? Do you have a driver's license for this particular country? Again, being respectful to the country and the governance. Insurance, liability, or malpractice insurance, if you're going to be doing medical healthcare related issues. Pharmacy license, if you're dispensing medicine, very important. Equally as important, and maybe even more impactful though, is being respectful to the local customs. And so we've worked in several different countries throughout the world, and we've noticed that the customs can vary widely within the country, right? And so we noticed, for instance, in Mozambique has three predominant tribes. It's a tribal situation. And so it's very important, if you want to do something within this tribe, to get the tribal chief's permission. That was true in Ghana as well. If the tribal chief says no, you're not doing it. It's not a democratic society, right? And if he embraces you, then you're going to be golden for whatever you're wanting to do. So make sure you know if it's a tribal country. It very well may be. If you go to Rwanda, obviously that is as well. Haiti is not. So Haiti is more familial, but there typically is a patriarch of the village. So it's not really tribal, but it's familial, and you need to get permission from that patriarch. In Haiti, the voodoo culture is very strong, and it's an open satanic worship. And so the voodoo practitioners are sort of the leaders of the villages. And so if you come in as a physician or a nurse, you're going head to head against those voodoo practitioners. And so doing things to try to develop relationships is very important. Ghana, a lot of child slavery. Honduras, there's ethnic strata depending on the ethnic background of the people that you need to recognize. Things are not like the United States. The United States, we have problems, but they just pale in comparison to so many other countries that are not nearly as far along with race relations and things like that. Learn the language. You've got to learn the language. You've got to make some effort, even if it's just saying good morning, right? You've got to learn the language. They will appreciate that more than you know. But another problem is, you say, well, I've got a great translator. Well, let's think about this just for a second. You got your translator, and he's got a needy family, right? So he's going to tell you what he thinks you want to hear, right? Because he wants to be your friend so that maybe you could sponsor him to come to the United States and get a visa. Or maybe you could send him money, or maybe something along those lines, right? And so he may not be telling, I'm not saying they're lying, but he's going to do what's convenient, for him. So when we're talking to people, it really is important that you keep, your ears open and your mind open. Do you know the difference between a translator and an interpreter? Translator is going to tell you exactly what that person says, word for word, exactly what they say. An interpreter is going to interpret what that person says and then tell you. So as a doctor, I don't want an interpreter, right? That's my job. I got to interpret the information, and if they've already interpreted it for me, it may be wrong. I want a translator, not an interpreter. And so it's a big difference as far as that's concerned. One of the most important best practices that you need to understand is security. It always amazes me how we'll send our kids, we'll have the high school youth group, and we'll send them into some of the most dangerous countries in the world, right? And it's just like, oh, they'll be fine. The youth pastor's, he's 22, so I'm sure he can take care of things. Yeah, it's like, really? I mean, we send our kids to Honduras, and that's the murder capital of the Americas, We probably wouldn't send our kids to inner city Chicago or Detroit, or Baltimore, because it's dangerous, but we'll send them to Honduras. So being cognizant of the security situation. This is also where the long-term mission can help you. It's one thing that long-term missions will have their finger on the pulse is if there's a problem in the community. Maybe it's a governmental problem, maybe there's been a theft, maybe something's going on, maybe it's gang activity, cartel activity, but security is extremely important. Now, the United States State Department, you can go to their website, they have travel alerts, and they have a 4-point system that they will rate countries, right? And so a level 1 country is extremely safe. So you're going to be talking someplace like Sweden or Norway, just a very, very safe place. A level 2 is a little bit more dangerous. A level 3, they advise you not to go there. It's just an advice. Level 4 is a do not go. Now, they can't force you from going, but that's their recommendation. Level 4 is a dangerous place. That's Somalia, that's Sudan, that's Mali, places like that, Central African Republic, Haiti for a long time. Haiti has just come off of a level 4. We live at level 3 in Haiti. And so we live at a level that is the State Department. It's a bunch of smart folks up there, right? The State Department is saying, don't go, right? Just go somewhere else. There's lots of other countries, right? So Haiti is a dangerous place, and you have to have security. We have been attacked, right? My wife has been kidnapped and beaten. I've been attacked. Our base manager has been murdered on our gate doorstep, right? 2 of our team members were kidnapped and tortured for 4 days this last August. That's the reality, right? Now, nobody wants to tell you all that, and that's just off the top of my head. We've been robbed probably 10 times, right? Carjacked. So these are things that you've got to understand. Now, we accept those risks as long-term missionaries, but we're not bringing short-term missionaries in at all because of this, because we're not able to provide protection. This is something you've got to know before you go into a country. The State Department has wardens, and so I'm a warden of our area of Tomazo, so I'm responsible for all Americans who are in that area. I wanted a badge. They wouldn't give me a badge. I think I deserve one, but yeah, they wouldn't do that. But the warden is responsible for alerting the embassy of any problems, giving them information and intel so that they can do their job. Evacuation insurance is very important. It's very inexpensive. You get appendicitis and you're in Haiti, I wouldn't advise going to a Haitian hospital to have your appendix taken out. I would advise getting on a very fast airplane and going to Miami, right, and getting your appendix taken out. Or if you fall and break your arm or your leg and you need to get out, you have some health care problem. If you have to go charter a jet, that's going to be very, very expensive. So evacuation insurance is very important. And then professional security. We have professional security on our base. Our base is 63 acres, and so we have armed security 24 hours a day on our base. And we take a lot of other precautions as well. So, talking specifically about medical missions, some of the things that I think are best practices that we need to emphasize is if you're a physician, say, so I'm an adjunct professor at a medical school. Would it be better for me to go in and operate on Haitians, or would it be better for me to mentor and train Haitian physicians and bring their skill sets up a notch or two? What would be best for the country? The training, right? I already know how to take an appendix out. I've done that before, right? And so it's not about us, it's about making this country better. So instead of nurses coming down and working in the hospital as a nurse, it would be so much better for them to develop a training protocol for maternal health or something like that, and educating our maternal health nurses, because they don't have the opportunity for CME. Just building capacity is so important. Now, one of the things we see a lot is people come in and will do surgery in some foreign country, and then they'll leave. And one of the important things about surgery is that you follow up your patients. If you've ever had surgery, I bet you had a follow-up appointment with your surgeon. I sure hope you did. You did if I had operated on you. But what if you leave? So you're there a week, 10 days, and you operate on somebody, you take the thyroid out or do something like that. who's going to follow that patient up if they have problems? Right? A certain percentage of the time, there's going to be problems. Well, if you leave, that's not good medical practice. That wouldn't even be legal in the United States. It'd be very unethical. So having that backup, so having a long-term missionary there who's a physician, as a surgeon, I can take care of those kinds of things. And so if we do surgery, that's not a problem. I think so strongly about this. I think if you don't have follow-up, you don't do surgery. I just don't think it's safe. You know, one thing about surgery too, there's a lot of things that you can do that you don't need to do, right? There are surgeries that you're capable of doing. We could do this today, but does the patient really need it? I mean, is this going to improve their lives? You know, we see a lot, polydactyly, people have extra fingers. Well, that's not going to hurt them. It's not going to kill them. It's not going to improve their life, and it may cause a massive infection if you do that, right? So do we need to do that? We can, it's easy, but do we need to? To avoiding unnecessary procedures. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has got some great guidelines. Google that. You can see their very, very large number of guidelines that they have. One of the things I think is so important is that we practice proper ethical considerations when we're dealing with our patients. We certainly would do that in the United States. Anything we do in the United States, we need to do when we're working overseas as well. And one of the things I think that suffers is consent. Consent for surgery, for instance. Well, in the United States, you know, we have rules about consent. You have to read a form, you have to sign it. There's a verbal assent as well. So what if you're in my area, 80% of the women can't read? They're illiterate. So, and they're also subservient to men, right? And so I come in and say, okay, we need to do this surgery. You understand? Well, she's not going to tell me no. I mean, culturally, that would never happen, right? And so how do you navigate that? That's very, very important. It's very important that she understands. Now, in the Haitian culture, since it's a family-dominated culture, you bring the whole family in, right? You explain it to the whole family. And they say, and they'll talk among themselves, and that may go on for quite some time, and they sort of get it figured out. And then at the end of it, they either say yes or no, right? And so that's one technique in a family-dominated arena. In a tribal area, it may be the tribal chief that you need to talk to. And obviously, there's difficulties with all of that, but there are things that you can do to get appropriate consent. When we're looking at medical clinics, you know, very often we're treating infections. That's a very common thing. Maybe you have children come in with earaches. And so you give antibiotics to mom. Mom brings in, the typical scenario, mom brings in 6 kids, right? And they're all holding hands, and they come into the room and they plop down, and this kid's got an earache, and this kid's got a sore throat, and this kid's got an infected toe, and this one's got something else. And so now you get medicine for all of these kids and you give it to mom. Now mom probably can't read, right? And you got your little baggie full of medicines, right? And you're handing them out and you say, well, this one's for this one and this one's for that one and this one's for that one, right? How's that going to work? You see a problem brewing here? Is mom going to have any? I couldn't figure it out. I mean, if I had been in that mom's place, there's no way in the world I could figure out who goes, you know, what medicine goes with which person. So developing a technique to bypass that. So we allow families to take one prescription home. One prescription. So if you got 6 kids, you pick the sickest one and you treat that one. Now the other ones can come back the next day, right? But one at a time. That way mom is able to give the right medicine to the right child and they get adequately treated. You know, there are no medicine cabinets in their huts. A lot of times you notice that, right? So where are they going to put their meds? So they got all these bags of meds and they got them stuck in their purse or bag. Well, a child thinks that's candy. So the number one cause of child morbidity in the developing world, so low-tier countries, coming from short-term medical mission groups, you know what it is? Number one cause of child disease and death. It's Tylenol poisoning. Tylenol poisoning. So you come in and you give mom a little bag of 30 Tylenol and say, you got a headache, you can take one. A child gets into that, it's toxic to the liver, right? And so the child dies. Number one cause, Tylenol ingestion. So being careful about that. Dosing confusion happens in the United States all the time, right? And so and it certainly happens overseas as well. One of the things I think is very important as well is if you're giving out medicines, are you hurting local pharmacies who are trying to sell the medicines? Have you done research to see, is there a local pharmacy? If there is, work with that pharmacy, because that person has a job and is trying to make a living and support their families by selling medications. It may be a way that you can help educate them, you can help bless them with business instead of competing with them. Same holds true with physicians. What if there's a local physician in this community that you're working in? And you see all these patients free. So you see 1,000 patients this week, and they without charge. You just took patients away from that local physician who's probably barely making it, right? If he leaves, then there's nobody there to take care of the population. And so making sure you understand who is in your community, making sure you're not being anti-competitive with them. Chronic diseases are a real problem. So somebody comes in and they've got high blood pressure, right? And you're going to give them a little baggie full of high blood pressure medicine, right? Now, the typical mindset in a lot of people in low-tier countries is, well, the doctor gave me the medicine, so if I take it, then I'm cured, right? It's not the way high blood pressure works, though. Same thing with diabetes. And so a couple of points that have to be considered: can they get that medicine in their local pharmacy? Don't give them a medicine they can't get. You may have the latest and greatest blood pressure medicine here in the United States, but it hadn't made it to Haiti yet. And so you give them a medication they can't get. That doesn't help them any, right? And they've got to understand this is something that has to be taken for life, right? They've got to take this every day. It's not just when you finish the medicine that you're good to go. And so these are problems that you'll see. One of the things that we tell our practitioners is to stay in your lane, right? Don't practice outside your expertise. Just because you're coming to a bottom tier country doesn't mean if you're a neurosurgeon you can deliver babies, right? Or if you're a cardiologist that you can take somebody's appendix out. It doesn't work like that, right? You're trained for a certain thing, and you have to be humble enough to say, I don't know anything about babies, right? So you just let me take care of this over here, I'll be happy. And so that's very important that we stay in our lane. So finally, one of the things that is really important to me, and this is something that our organization really tries to reinforce, is dignity among the people, right? So most of the countries we work in, women are a bottom class individual, right? They may not get enough food, they may not get education, they're having to do the labor that men don't want to do. They may be abused, they may be beaten. And so making a big deal about women signals to the society that women are important, right? And so we will do things like in our maternal health program. We have about 300 women in our maternal health program. And they come and we feed them because they don't get enough to eat, so their body mass index is very low. So we feed them lunch. But we don't just feed them lunch. We have them sit down at a table and we have a fork and spoon. They've never seen that. They always eat with their hands, right? And they have a napkin, and they get to sit. Now, the thing that I love to do, and it just tickles them to no end, is have me serve them the food, right? Because here's the doctor coming in, serving them the food. That's an honor. That is me humbling myself and showing them honor, and they absolutely love it. It's something that really builds them up. But it's even better if the men can see me doing that, right? Because if we can change the culture that women are valued in their culture, then we've really accomplished something. So giving people dignity. One of the ways that we can do that as well is not subsidizing poverty. You know, these people, our target audience are all the extreme poor. So we're talking about people who live on less than $1.90 a day. So the extreme poor. So these people are barely able to live. They're on the knife edge of survival. And so if we give them things, what does that transmit to them? If I just give them things, everything we just give it, it's all free. What does that transmit? What idea does that transmit to them? That, yeah, it's dependence. That they're not worth, they don't have any resources, right? And so they see the American, right? And so the American's just going to give everything to them. Well, that does not achieve a level of dignity that's appropriate, right? And so we really try to have, now, if we're in an emergency situation, obviously, you know, we would give. We try to have a transaction, and we think a transaction is extremely important. So if we, for instance, build houses for somebody, we mortgage it. And so they come in, and we don't charge them interest, right? Some people argue we should, so they'd understand interest. But we actually mortgage it for them. So they come in, and they pay us every month, and it's, you know, it's very little. But that gives them pride of ownership in their house. And it's so fascinating. 100% of the people pay us back. We've never had anybody default. And now we're seeing some of the houses we built, you know, 8 or 10 years ago, the people are adding on to them. They're painting them. They're doing things that we would all do in the United States, but that's not typical. That's very atypical in these cultures. But it's because they're proud of it, and they have a dignity because of that. Supplementing employment, you know, not going in and supplanting employment. So if you're going on a mission to build houses in a country that's full of people who know how to build a house, and they just need a few resources, you could employ those people to build that house. They'd do a whole lot better job anyway, and they'd have a job. And then they'd be able to feed their family and build dignity. So that's just another way to go about that. Are there any questions that I can help with as far as best practices in short-term missions? Thank you so much. Oh, yes.
So speakers that we heard earlier this morning talked about the same thing that you did about mentoring the medical personnel in the country to help them become self-sustaining. But they talked about also in the mentoring, they want to help them become more competent, but also provide competent, compassionate care. So could you talk a little bit about how you've done that at the hospital in Haiti?
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point. And one of the things that I would add to that is we're not trying to provide American-level hospital care in Haiti, right? There's no way the resources are there, you know, so that's one thing that I think is important. It needs to be appropriate for their technology level. And so that's one thing that I think is very important. You know, and I think mentoring, being the example is the way to do that. And so showing compassion for people who are sick, right? Sometimes in some of these countries, especially with males, you just don't see that. There's not a lot of compassion. There's sort of this, especially if they're educated, there's a real tiered system, and they sort of look down. And so sort of showing them, rather than talking about it, sort of showing them how to show compassion to people who are injured, who are sick, I think is the best way to do it. And that's where we have success. And so instead of yelling at a patient for not knowing their medicines, right, showing compassion on that and saying, you know, I forget mine too. So it's easy, but helping them along those lines. That example, I think, is the best way to teach. It's a great question.